Ajamu Baraka, an internationally recognized human rights defender and member of the executive board of the U.S. Peace Council and national organizer of the Black Alliance for Peace, BAP. Welcome to Min Al-Dakhil from the Inside, sir.
My pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
It's our pleasure, sir, actually. So as a delegation co-leader, Ajamu, you were in Venezuela as part of a big delegation of human rights, civil rights and peace rights activists to see and get first-hand experience on the ground of the real Venezuela and not that propagated in your mainstream corporate media. Firstly, the trip was complicated by American Airlines cancelling all flights in and out of the country, which caused some complications. Yet, this did not quell you. Can you tell us about how did you manage such challenges, please?
Yes, it was a very calculated effort, it appears to be, on the part of American Airlines and their pilot association to create a sense of chaos in the country. What it posed for our delegation was that a number of individuals who had connecting flights from Miami into Caracas were forced to reconnect with other airlines in order to get into the country. We had that situation going into the country and also coming back. We found that they continued with their embargo against Venezuela, and it meant that we had a number of our delegates who were forced to stay in the country days after we were scheduled. So again, this was, it appears to be a calculated effort to create almost an alternative reality to what's happening on the ground.
Now, Ajamu, you also arrived in the midst of a kind of cyber attack and sabotage of the entire Venezuelan electrical system, which resulted in an almost total blackout of the country, like in 22 states out of 24, for 20 hours or more than that. Ajamu, tell us here about your experience in such circumstances, and how did you understand such an attack against Venezuela and its people?
We had a chance to experience the attack firsthand when we finally landed in Caracas. It was in the midst of the cyber attack. So the airport was without power. When we got into the city, we saw that there were people who were having to line up to get water because with no electric. Of course, you can't pump water up into the upper levels of the high-rise apartments. We saw that people didn't have to withdraw money from the ATM because of the absence of electric. This cyber attack represents a illegal attack on the civic infrastructure, civilian infrastructure, which is by international law a violation of international law. So we saw firsthand the consequences, even in the hotel that we were staying in. We saw the consequences of this cyber attack across the country.
Observers actually say that the U.S. tried to sabotage the Iranian electrical grid and has used electricity attacks in previous coups. So it seems that this is part of the U.S. coup playbook.
It really does. And in fact, we have seen evidence that suggested that this was a centerpiece of their efforts to try to generate popular opposition to the government. But of course, that opposition did not materialize. As a matter of fact, it appears that they may have made a major tactical mistake because many people, even people who were not completely in support of the government, felt that the cyber attack was an assault on their national dignity. And therefore they were supporting the resistance of the Venezuelan people to this kind of intrusive attack. So this is part of the playbook to target the population with the objective that the population will crumble and turn on its own government. But we have seen that that did not happen in Venezuela, as it hasn't happened in other places.
Why do you believe, Ajamu, that this thing did not materialize? I mean, the intended outcome of such kind of violation and attack against Venezuela and the people of Venezuela, why did it fail?
It failed because the coup plotters in the U.S. didn't understand that Venezuela was going through a process of real transformation, that you have a generation now that have embraced the values of the Bolivarian Revolution. They have embraced the notion that they have a right to independence, to national sovereignty, and that they are more than prepared to resist any attempts to undermine their process. That solid base of support was reflected, for example, in the election last year that the U.S. claims was illegitimate, but yet almost 7 million people voted for Maduro and the continuation of the process. So there is a solid base of popular support for this process in Venezuela. That's why they miscalculated with this dramatic and reckless assault on the electrical grid in that country.
Right, terrific. Now tell us, Ajamu, what have you experienced? Who have you met with? And your findings regarding the pulse of the people of Venezuela and the officials with whom you've met?
We had a chance to meet both officials and people on the streets. We had a chance to see the marvelous developments that the Venezuelan people are involved in areas like developing urban agriculture to try to address the issue of food dependency on outside sources. We had a chance to visit communities. For example, one community that was very, very impressive was a community called Katia, 1.5 million people in West Caracas that represents the real base of the Bolivarian process, a community of Black and brown people, working class people who were very proud of the fact that they have not had any slippage in their support for their government and their process. And then we had a chance at the end of the visit, after visiting and talking with the foreign ministers and others, to have a 90-minute session with President Maduro himself to discuss what was happening in the country, in the region, and back in the United States of America.
Now, Ajamu, also you have attended an historic meeting with over 100 countries represented in Caracas, Venezuela, in early March. Out of that meeting, the Caracas Declaration was published. What did it focus on, and why is the solidarity by people in the United States of America critical in this sense?
The Declaration centered the idea of human solidarity, or solidarity among peoples who understood that there could be an alternative to the global structure that we have right now. And that's why in that solidarity objective, the solidarity of people in the United States is absolutely critical. Critical because of the standing, the situation where we find ourselves right in the middle of empire. And therefore we have a higher responsibility to try to put a brake on these efforts by the U.S. state to undermine the national sovereignty of countries around the world. So that is critical for us as human rights activists, as peace activists in the U.S. And we saw the Caracas Declaration and our own efforts as critical for grounding our work in developing that kind of solidarity with the people of Venezuela and the people of the globe.
Right. Allow us, Ajamu, to stop now for a short break, and then afterwards we're going to talk and detail a bit more on how solidarity is a process and not a slogan, but after the break. إذا فاصل قصير ونعود. لا تذهبوا بعيدا. أهلا بكم من جديد. Ajamu Baraka, internationally recognized human rights defender and member of the executive board of the U.S. Peace Council and national organizer of the Black Alliance for Peace. Welcome back to the Inside, sir. Well, actually, Jill Stein, the Green Party's presidential candidate in 2012 and 2016, said, quote, "It's frightening to see the mainstream media push fake news and war propaganda about Venezuela just like they did about Iraq 16 years ago. What are your plans in challenging the false narrative on Venezuela, Ajamu, and putting in mind that solidarity is a process and not a slogan?"
What this means is that we have to be able to galvanize the American people who understand their critical responsibility as citizens in the U.S. When their state seems to be intent on using its massive military and intelligence power to undermine the solidarity, undermine the sovereignty of nations around the world. It means that it's not enough just to verbalize opposition, but that opposition has to be reflected in stronger organizations and the ability to put pressure on U.S. representatives to be in opposition to these criminal state activities. So this is what we see as a responsibility. We are moving toward developing a strong anti-war, pro-peace in the U.S. And the delegation we took to Venezuela was part of that process. It enhanced our ability to come back to the U.S. and to explain to the people the reality on the ground in that country.
Right. Now, former U.S. President Barack Obama declared Venezuela a threat to U.S. national security on 3 different occasions. Why? And does Venezuela actually pose any kind of menace to the U.S. today?
The only threat that Venezuela poses to the U.S. and why the Obama administration identified them as a threat is that it represents a model of progress, a potential progress in Latin America and really throughout the world. They saw the Bolivarian process, the process moving toward what they referred to as 21st century socialism, as a existential threat to the U.S. And they understood that Venezuela, its importance wasn't just for itself, but for the entire region. And so with the declaration by the Obama administration that Venezuela represented a national security threat, it opened up the floodgates, the legal ability in terms of the U.S. To begin to systematically undermine the sovereignty of that country.
Right.
And that policy continues under the Trump administration.
Right. It continues on and on. Actually, the Black Alliance for Peace tend to make a connection between the economic, political, and ideological war being waged against Venezuela and the war being waged against all Africans, including the African or Black working class and poor in the US of A. Why do Afro-Venezuelans say today, "We want peace, but we are ready for war"?
They say that they understand that they're in the crosshairs of U.S. Destabilization. And like all rational people, they would like to live in peace and have the ability to develop their own process and take care of their families and live lives without violence. But they understand that they have to be prepared to defend their process from a state that seems to be intent on undermining their progress. So they say to Black people in the United States and other people in the U.S. That we want peace, but we are prepared to struggle, and that we should, those of us in the U.S., should take that message to our people and remind people, in particular Black people in the U.S., that Venezuela is a nation of people of color, and that a central component of the leadership are people of color and Black people, and specifically, and that if they align themselves with the Trump administration and the Democrats that support the Trump administration in this attack on Venezuela, that they are in fact aligning themselves with a expression of white power, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
So that is our message to our people back in the United States of America.
Mm-hmm. Now, in the same context, well, Ajamu, NATO is a US-European instrument for continued colonization of the world. We saw that in the year 2011, NATO-led attack on Libya, the most prosperous African country, and this war destabilized the African continent. In fact, the 8th also anniversary of this invasion passed on March 19th, along with the 16th anniversary of the US-led Iraq invasion on March 20th. Actually, March is a month that commemorates a multiple imperialist interventions. What events are you organizing to protest such imperialist interventions?
We are in the midst of organizing a massive mobilization that's going to take place on Saturday, March 30th, to make the connection between Venezuela and NATO, for example. The focus is on NATO as an instrument of imperialist aggression. Those of us in the Black Alliance for Peace, we call attention to what we call the axis of domination, the US, EU, and NATO. And we say that there is a fundamental contradiction between the peace-loving people of the world who want only to have national development and peace, and this axis of domination coming from the West that is desperately attempting to try to maintain this global hegemony by any means necessary, including the use of massive violence. So this is the task that we see that the global South has today, to recognize the global contradiction, and it's the contradiction that we see in the Black Alliance for Peace that represents our main mission in terms of our work in the U.S.
Right, bless your heart. Now, it also coincides with the first year to the Great March to Return of the Palestinians. What do you say today on the first anniversary of this 1 year to the start in Gaza of the demonstrations of the Great March of Return and the continuous non-stop Israeli human rights abuses, especially after Trump officially recognized Israel's annexation of occupied Golan?
The violence unleashed against the Palestinian people on the Great March of Return and the silence of opposition to that violence, it reveals the moral hypocrisy of not only the Trump administration, but the corporate media and most of the punditry in the U.S. And it suggests that any argument that the Trump administration and the Democrats raise about their concerns about the humanity of people in Venezuela should be contrasted with the support that they gave to the slaughter of Palestinian people by the Israeli authorities. The fact that, that hundreds of people can be murdered and thousands injured without any moral outrage from the West, again, reveals the kind of lawlessness and moral hypocrisy that we believe characterizes the position of the West today. So when they talk about their commitment to traditional values, all of us who are colonized and oppressed, we need to be on guard, because those traditional values seem to be values that don't recognize our collective humanity.
Right. Now, my last question for you, Ajamu. Russian officials and pro-Kremlin lawmakers said that Venezuela, after Iraq, Libya, Ukraine, and Syria, was becoming the latest victim of global U.S. efforts to foment regime change in violation of international norms. Now, Ajamu, how do you compare between Syria in 2011 onwards and Venezuela today, in how events escalated and the fabrication of narrative, how the opposition is trafficking hitmen, mercenaries and paramilitaries from Central America?
Well, there's some very troubling parallels, but of course the situation is a little different in that Venezuela is really in the backyard of the U.S. state, and its ability to be even more mischievous and destructive is intensified. But we see that the coup playbook is quite consistent. The demonization of the government, the destabilization using proxy forces inside the country is quite consistent with that playbook. So we are hoping that the introduction of more intensive military activity in Venezuela is avoided. That's why we are mobilizing this weekend to continue the pressure on the U.S. state, to continue to educate people in the U.S. To be opposed to these interventions, so that there's not an escalation of violence with the same consequence for people in Venezuela as what we saw throughout the so-called Middle East over the last decade and a half.
Right. Ajamu Baraka, internationally recognized human rights defender and member of the executive board of the U.S. Peace Council and national organizer of the Black Alliance for Peace. Many thanks indeed for joining us, for your insights, and you talked to us from Washington, D.C.
Thank you so much.